So I'm going to be talking tonight about Angular. Just to give you a little bit of information about my background, I've been using Angular now for a year. I came from React and React Native. I took this position not because of Angular, but because it was a 5-minute commute. I really like my job, but Angular itself is a framework, a very, I shouldn't say anything bad because it's just about the good parts, but Angular is it's a framework. It's yeah, it's got a lot of stuff going on. But there are a few things that I started appreciating over time with Angular that I honestly think I would miss if I went back. So this is about that. It's a completely subjective list of things. First of all, just a bit about Angular itself. So I'm talking about Angular 2+, not Angular JS, which is Angular 1. They're currently on Angular 6. So they're dropping new Angular versions twice a year. So this is 2+. All right, so first of all, I'm going to talk about TypeScript. TypeScript is what's called a superset of JavaScript, which means everything within JavaScript will work within TypeScript. But not everything within TypeScript works within JavaScript. And actually, when it gets compiled down, the TypeScript stuff gets removed. So it actually, that part of it makes it pretty easy to pick up just because you don't have to use it initially. You can just start picking it up slowly as you get into it. But
should we make a start again?
No.
Sorry.
Okay. Sorry.
Sorry.
Keep going.
So TypeScript, of course, is useful for typing. So
Sorry. Go on. Keep going. It wasn't recording. Now it's recording.
Is it recording?
I swear.
These are the nicest.
He swears.
These are the nicest interruptions you'll get from Mark.
All right, so yeah, so TypeScript is used primarily for typing. So to give you an example of what that looks like, can you see that? It's too small. Okay, so first of all, this is production code, just because it's hard to set up new projects. Nothing like interesting in here, nothing proprietary in the code that I'm showing you. But this is an example of how you type things. So like strings, numbers, like you have all the primitive types. It will actually infer types if you initialize with, like say setting it as a string, or you initialize it with a number. So one of the nice things about it is also, so with a function, so I have certainly wasted a lot of hours in my life debugging problems that probably could have been caught by TypeScript, but they're problems that caught runtime because I flipped parameters, some like dumb mistakes. And certainly that's one of the things that I like about TypeScript the best, is that it limits that a whole lot. So one of the things, like for example, this is out of a service that I'm probably calling code from elsewhere, but I'm just gonna pretend like I'm calling it from somewhere else. But basically it'll complain. So if I were actually running the server and I tried to save this file, it wouldn't compile because I'm passing in a string into where it expects an array. And this is a place again where it infers the array because of the way it was initialized. You can also, with your methods, you can declare the return type, which is also nice. So if I, so let's see, this is the expecting string, so that should complete, it's not completing. But if I did that, again, it won't compile. This is actually the red squiggly stuff that's from TSLint, but it'd still be a compilation. So there's that. There's also interfaces. Let's see. And so interfaces, if you have complex data structures, you can set up interfaces to define what they're going to look like, which is pretty helpful. Like I said, like if you have complex data. Since I'm getting my data like from an API, it doesn't affect me as much. But when I was writing tests like mock data, it was actually helpful. I'll show you what it does. So if I say I'm creating a machine, here, it will actually let me autocomplete what I defined in the interface. So it's just a helpful little tool. Let's see here, get back here. So one of the other things that you can do with TypeScript is typings are available for a lot of third-party software, third-party libraries. So like I use Moment.js, which is a nice library for dates, for parsing dates and stuff. And so once I downloaded the typings, I actually can pull up like what methods are available for Moment. And then it also knows what parameters are expected. So in this case, if I put in like that, it will actually complain. It won't let me compile this. But if I put in month, like in this example, I'm adding a month to a date, it'll actually know if I put in a valid unit of time. So they're really nice things that, like normally I would probably have to go to the documentation, whereas with this, I can just pull it right up. So.
Robin, is that from Definitely Typed or something like that?
It was from the NPM types, NPM types. Okay, so up next, so I was trying to decide how to like order this stuff, and unfortunately it's all like kind of interdependent. But I kind of decided up next, maybe it made sense to talk about the store first up. So state management. So to anybody who is not familiar with state management, like with Redux, the idea behind a store is that you have one source of data within your entire application. So like in my application, I have to have information about a user. I have to know information, whether to know they can use a certain, I don't know, use some certain functionality or view some report, something like that. So I just want to get the user once and be able to use that elsewhere. So that's the concept behind the store. Trying to keep it high level, hopefully that makes sense. But basically the Indirect Store is, I think it's like the de facto one right now, but there are a couple others that are becoming popular. But actually Redux is available in Angular, but I couldn't quite figure it out. Because Angular deals with everything as observables and Redux.
I think that Rob wrote that, or started that project, and that's what it was in the beginning, was he wanted Redux to work better.
Yeah.
The Angular 2 was new at the time. And then it just, obviously all the observable stuff came in, but that was the whole idea. It's like, let's make something just like Redux for Angular.
Yeah, yeah. So if you come from Redux, it's actually pretty easy. It has actions, reducers. So the idea here, just to go over the code a little, basically you'll dispatch an action, like in this case, the I'm getting devices not large enough for people to see.
It's really small.
Okay, I'm sorry. About as big as it's going to get from Keynote, apparently. But basically, the idea is with actions, you tell it that you want something, so you want to, say, make an API request. And then there will be an action that's fired when the API request is finished, when it's complete, or if it comes back as a failure. And then it gets stored in the reducer, so then you can, that's the way that you just pull it out. So basically that's the data store, and you pull out, through the reducer, you pull out a slice of that data store. Okay, so I had mentioned that Indirect Store uses observables. Angular is also built with observables. RxJS is the library that we use. So basically, it's basically a stream is what you can think of an observable as. So probably one of the things, so when you bring up async stuff, you probably think of HTTP requests, which are kind of one-off requests that you probably don't do much with after you get it initially. That's not where observables shine. I kind of figured that out after a while. So for a while I thought it was just really confusing promises, but it's really a lot more than that, as it turns out. So there are a lot of operations that you can perform on the data before you actually get it back. So it's kind of like you can perform maps and filters on it. So it'd be kind of like with a promise if you were able to perform this as a stream before you actually got the data, if that makes any sense. So with RxJS, besides dealing, I mean, you can deal with HTTP, but I'm not sure you can get much on top of actual promises. Besides dealing with that, though, you can deal with events. So like click events, or like in this case, it's a browser resize event. So yeah, so you can convert that, and you actually subscribe to the stream, and then you can react to this event anytime it fires. But then subscribe. So the part that I really like about it, though, is that it can also react to any changes to anything within the store. So I just subscribe to that piece of data in the store that I'm interested in, and I can react to that. One of the things that Angular has that's really nice is called the async pipe. So you can actually take the value of an observable. I really wish you could see this code. Really sad, actually, you know. What's that? Let me see if I can find the. Yeah, no, actually, it's in here. Yeah, we got too much stuff in there. Shoot. Okay.
Can you zoom in right there in
It's
Keynote?
not, no. The command plus isn't, that's the normal.
Or maybe not in the slideshow mode, but if you go back to edit mode, can you zoom in?
Yeah, then it didn't either.
One more.
Yeah. That's too bad, because I really like this code. It's really fun. I wrote it earlier this week. It's actually just one single, so what I was doing was, I have like a dashboard for users that have like a bunch of widgets on it. And I added functionality that a user could choose different layouts, different grid. It's basically just CSS, so it has different CSS applied to it. One line of code that I got it to work, it's, there's an ng class directive you can use that will, I take the grid that the user has chosen from the store, I pipe it into the async, and then it changes what the CSS class is. You know, like so much code. So just that kind of stuff I really enjoy. This, I should say that like all of this stuff, it's not anything that you need to do. It's kind of to improve developer life. You could certainly accomplish all of this stuff different ways. It's just kind of, I like it because it's, I find it very readable and understandable. But yeah, it's kind of, so async await is also like a big improvement over promises. And I think it's kind of approaching like the same problem, just in a different way. It's sort of cool. Okay, so next up of my kind of arbitrary list of things is a library called NGX Restangular. I imagine this exists elsewhere, but it basically just lets you handle just regular REST API calls. It just packages them up. But one of the things that I really like about it is that it allows you to do request and response interceptors at an application level. So one of the things that I have here is if I get a 401 unauthorized back from the server, I will actually try for a refresh token. Go back to this, you can't see. I'm going to try for a refresh token and then retry the request. That's that line of code. And then I'll see if I get a response back. If I don't, if I get an error, then I'll actually send the user back to the sign-in page. This is all within this line of these lines of code, and it handles it application-wide. So it's pretty powerful. You can also put like headers on it. Also, at the bottom, I have that handling 500. So if I get a 500 for any reason, and actually you can specify by the operation. So if it's a get operation, you can treat it differently than if it's a post operation. But if I get a 500 anywhere, it'll redirect the user. And also I can use the environment, so I only do this in production. It's nuts. But I can redirect the user to a page apologizing for API down. So it's pretty, it's nice. I don't know if anything like that exists outside of Angular, but Yes, thank you. Okay, so I think I talked like really fast. This is the last screen. There were actually a lot more things I could talk about with Angular that I liked, that I started appreciating. But this is another thing that contrasted to me with React. Like with React, I think like when you're talking about a full-fledged framework versus something like React, there are pros and cons. One of the pros of having a full-fledged framework is that you have something like routing built in. It means you don't have a choice, but it also means that like when you upgrade Angular, for example, you'll get an upgraded router with it. So you don't have to worry about installing an NPM library. Not that that's hard, but yeah.
Form
so
validation and
that's all built into Angular.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, it's
So there are
full-on
advantages.
framework.
Yeah, there are advantages to it, certainly. You lose control. But yeah, anyways. Yeah, so one of the cool things is the Angular routing. And this is another place where I was able to do like one line of code of something that ended up being really useful. Basically, you can add guards, is what they're called, to routes. So if I say, in this example, I have a route to settings, which I only allow admins to use. So what the guard does is that it will return either an observable Boolean or a Boolean. The power behind getting an observable is that I can actually make an HTTP request or some asynchronous request, and actually, the route will route there or not, depending on the result of that HTTP request. And so like this code down here is all of the code that I have to implement preventing users from getting into sections where they're not allowed. And then it's one line of code in the routing definition file. So it's very, and it's too bad you can't read it, it's very succinct code, trust me. It's basically just using observables, pulling from the store, just very easy to read.
So I know with Angular.js, with the built-in router, I can't remember what it was called, but there was another router that people really like to use with Angular. Did anyone do it?
I know what you're talking about, but I can't remember the name.
UI router.
Yeah.
So like you didn't have to use the Angular router. You could use UI router. And I don't remember, I never really used it, but I know people loved it.
Yeah.
I mean, is there no UI router, whatever, for Angular today? Are there no alternatives?
Not that I know of. The Angular router is pretty good, so it's possibly because of that. Yeah, I'm not sure how easy it would be to override, because this is part of the base Angular internal stuff, so I'm not sure how.
I think around Angular 2, they consolidated UI router with the Angular
I
router.
think so.
Oh, they actually, the
Yeah,
Angular
the
router
good
is UI
parts.
router now?
They kind of consolidated the two.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I think they were working with the UI router team to do that.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah. So,
Robin, to kind of tie in with your routing and your subscriptions thing, I just ran into this today as I was hooking up Azure Insights, which is basically like Google Analytics, but the Azure version of it. And you can actually subscribe to the router view change. So when the URL changes, it's just a subscription. So this is like one function. I subscribe to the router and say, whenever the view changes, send a message off to the tracking,
cool.
so you know what the user change routes to.
Yeah.
And it was, a one-liner, you just drop it right in.
Yeah, that's what I like about observables, is that you can do so much, you have so much power with very little code, and it's also very understandable code. It's what I found. So,
Yeah, I was dreading
it's
this
fun.
job, and it was like
Yeah, it's fun once you get it set up, once you get it working. It's cool. So, thank you. So is there anything else? Any other questions?
So having used Angular for a year, would you rather go back to React tomorrow?
Honestly, I would miss TypeScript. You can use TypeScript with Angular.
You can use TypeScript with React.
Yeah.
So you can use TypeScript. So
just the cool kids are.
with that, I would, yeah.
You still go back to React.
It's so lightweight, and honestly, having to figure out the extra stuff isn't that bad to me. I like having more control over what I choose and what I add in, rather than getting the whole thing that I probably only need like 40% of what Angular's offering. I would prefer, I mean, there's pros and cons, but that's just how I prefer things. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Do you work with any generated TypeScript code? So we use Google Protobufs, and it generates our marshalling and non-marshalling code, and then it generates TypeScript headers for it. And the thing that I'm missing is being able to add extra functions to the generated code that I like to have, and I'm trying to figure out a way to kind of automate those definitions into the TypeScript definitions later, so I can use those things that I'm going to make.
Yeah.
Do you have any experience with that?
I hand wrote all my.
I mean, because I can always just square bracket it and put the method name in quotes, but it's not as nice. I mean, there's ways around it, but I didn't know if anyone has solutions for that.
So Robin, there was that great talk that Sebastian Mark Boga gave about minimal API surface area. I don't know if anybody's seen it. It's a really good talk. And
The great deleter?
what's that?
The great deleter? It's always removing stuff from React.
Oh yeah, exactly. And I think, so I started out with Angular 1, and I think what made a lot of us, and Joe, you started with Angular 1 too, right? I think what made a lot of
I
us...
started way before that, but yes.
Fair enough. But what I think a lot of us found with React is that minimal API surface area. What I always found with Angular was, like, every time I thought I knew what I was doing, there was some like DOM syntax or some like extra library or some like little hidden thing that I needed to learn about.
Yeah.
How have you found with the newer versions of Angular? Is that still kind of the case?
It's still the case.
Especially because you have an interesting case where you came from React. A lot of people abandoned Angular to go to React.
Right.
Not many people.
That's
I don't
the correct
think.
direction. I had a 5-minute commute. I had an hour commute. I went down to 5 minutes, and that is good.
Or has it gotten better? Or
What's that?
Or has it gotten better, that whole API surface area
I'm not
issue?
sure what you're talking about, the surface area.
Well, just that there's so much API to it.
Like services providers. And
Yeah, there's
Oh,
like
service-
there was like the
service, I thought you
HTTP
were
module, and then there was routing, and then there was all this extra
Oh,
stuff.
no,
Yeah,
it's still
it's
awful. It's a
still-
nightmare. And tests, writing
Okay.
tests is a nightmare because then you have to put all those into your tests.
You have to mock all that stuff?
Yeah, pretty much.
Good
Everything's stubbed. Yeah.
And then tests, like back in the day, it was protractor. Like that's what
Oh,
you're
yeah.
supposed to use if you're doing Angular. Is that still?
Thankfully, this comes with Karma and Jasmine, so
Okay.
that's pretty good. I'm okay with it, but it's very difficult to set up.
Wasn't Protractor like a Selenium kind of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cypress, maybe.
Oh, maybe Cypress. Cypress is
the way
getting
to go.
hot too, yeah.
Totally. I had a question
We just
about
write component tests.
Yeah, exactly.
API Redux. You kind of gave an example, because I was kind of faced with that. This app is just starting, React just starting to get bigger. And so for me, I just used the service to get the current user.
Yeah.
And I just injected where I need it.
Yeah.
But I could easily see, well, at some point, I'm going to be injecting a lot of services a lot of places.
Yeah.
Is that why you ended up going with a Redux style approach, or?
I did it because I worked with Redux before and I enjoyed it. But one of the things that you'll get over doing something like that is that you can combine the data a lot easier than if you have a separate service just getting separate API endpoints and you're getting them separately. That's one thing that's actually really cool about Indirect Store is that you can create selectors. And these selectors actually emit like when anything changes, but you can actually combine from different parts of the store. So like in my case, I have like locations, which are sites, and I have machines, and they're stored in they're coming from different API endpoints, but there's a relationship there. And so with a selector, I can just get one slice and it all comes together, if that makes sense.
So you would admit it all as when either of them changes, you'd admit
Exactly, yeah.
as though it's one thing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's one selector basically, but you can combine those. So yeah, I would say like that would definitely be a use case where you want to switch to a store. I'm trying to think. like I have settings, like user settings, I'm storing my store. I've just found it so easy to wire up to the store that, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure if I get anything out of doing that over doing service, but. Yeah. Oh, another thing actually that Indirect Store lets you do, I'm not sure if Redux does it, but it's very easy to store the entire store in local storage. So if you have a slow API or something, you can have it load up from the local, you can have it initiate from the local storage when a user first comes to your application, and then it's a lot faster, and then you can, refresh stuff from there.
Because it'll change, the store will update right away, right? Once
once the API, but like the API I work with, sometimes it takes a minute to come back with requests. That's kind of awful. So that at least gives the user something to see. So that might be something.
That's pretty cool.
So it has the same hydrate thing in Angular's version of React. Or sorry, Redux.
What's that?
Hydrate, like take whatever is in.
Oh, hydration. Yeah, exactly.
Same thing.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, so that exists. Yeah, I didn't use that before, but yeah.
Is there still, I know at some point when Angular 2 was first coming out, there was a story about server-side Angular, but I haven't heard about it in a long time. Like, is that, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but is it happening? Is it growing? Are people using it? Is it a thing, or is it
server-side?
Server-side Angular.
Not that I know of. I noticed recently that they call themselves a platform in addition to a framework, which is kind of interesting. But I know that they want to also work mobile, and they actually discourage an Angular direct manipulation of the DOM because they want it to be able to work mobile as well. That's not server-side, but it's still kind of, they want to keep themselves open, I think, is the idea.
I think it's been that way since Angular 1. That was like their big approach with Angular 1, and it was part of the problem too, because a lot of people got introduced to Angular 1 and were told never touch the DOM, and so they never touched the DOM, but they also never learned the DOM. So when something would break, and they're like, how do I do it? It's like an old jQuery question. It's like, how do I do a for loop in jQuery? It's like, how do I fix the DOM in Angular?
Get an element ref, and you're all good to go.
Yeah, that's good.
I think even Google has changed the crawlers, so you don't necessarily have to server-side render as much as you used to.
That would be the only reason, but sure.
Yeah, I suppose. But I mean, that's at least the most popular use case, right?
Well, it's certainly a concern at a practical business level, but from an application level, I mean, with React, I mean, you can, nowadays, I could say something like Next, but you can deliver your client from the server side immediately while the JavaScript's still loading up.
Well, the HTML,
JavaScript's ready,
right.
It can take over routing and everything else, but you can deliver the state of your application from the server side instantly, and then let the client side application take over from there. So whatever it is that state is, they land on the page, they see it instantly. They click on a button, go to another page, now you're on the client side. So the entire thing is rendered out in HTML and CSS, like purely straight to the browser. And oh yeah, here's the client side app as well.
But you're not really interactive until the client side loads, right?
No, in the good frameworks, if the client's not ready, everything's server side. So when you click on something, the server comes back. So yeah, a little slower, but your initial load was super quick.
Right.
And then, if the JavaScript takes another 2 seconds or 5 seconds to load, it's not the end of it. And 5 seconds would be fucking insane. But
right. Yeah.
A couple seconds, it doesn't really matter because poof, here's your page.
Right.
And it's better for SEO.
Yeah, that's what he was saying originally.
Yeah,
like
not quite as much anymore though, because they've changed the crawlers to be more client side friendly. But like Joe's saying, it's
just
depends
keywords
on your...
right? A whole bunch of keywords?
A bunch of meta tags.
Yeah.
Meta tags, yeah.
It's weird. I had somebody at work, I asked them, like, you need to add meta tags or meta keywords or whatever to a page, and you did it in JavaScript. My first instinct is like, that's not going to work. Turns out that works sometimes, and it blew my mind.
He was getting at
right.
Like they've
It's
gotten
crazy.
smarter about it or
Yeah.
something. You used to have to do a lot of fallback stuff, like even back in the Flash days, if you had an entire Flash website,
Oh, God, yeah.
you'd have to have like a special setup so that if a search engine showed up, it would just get all the content, like all this like keyword content and stuff, because otherwise there was nothing, as far
Right.
as Google was concerned, there's nothing on your page. And a lot of the same stuff happens with the JavaScript apps, but now you can actually just do, you know, document title equals whatever, and somehow shit shows up in the search engine.
What shows up, John?
Just stuff.
Okay, just ask.
Hoopla.
So to bring us back on track, thank you very much, Robin.